go.
Nice.
Thank you. Look, I've been thinking a little bit about this, so if you're happy for me just to talk, I'll do so, and feel free to interject, obviously, at any time. That's called Love Letter number 6, which obviously, I'll just tilt this a little bit, is the 6th love letter piece. Those pieces began when I wrote the first one, which just sort of came to me based on the first sound that I created. Now, that might sound like maybe a weird way to describe it, but as I've been playing over the years, I've got, various sounds that I like on the instrument, chords and things. And one of my favourites, which the whole series has a lot of them, is a first inversion major chord with the 9th added to it, like this sort of a chord. The very first one, love letter piece, began with this chord, which is a G major 9 over B. Anyway, so this was one of my favourite sounds that, as I said, I began with, and love letter number 1 evolved out of that. And that piece itself happened quite quickly. I haven't played that one, obviously, but I'll talk in general terms about these pieces. And when I wrote it, as I'm sure as a composer yourself, the way pieces come to you vary quite a bit. The ideal thing that happens to us, and I've watched a lot of interviews and read a lot of interviews with composers, is that when it sort of comes out without you having to labour too much over it, it just sort of pops out, or certainly themes or really good things come out almost like you're just the channel for it. We've all heard that, you're the conduit. So when I wrote that first one, which happened quite like that, I did end up tweaking it. So it's not a pure process, and obviously there's pieces that have varying degrees of things that just pop out, and then other times where you have to use your craft to mould the thing and put it all together. But what I thought was, I wrote that first piece, was really happy with it, and actually I played it in a room at AIM, and somebody came in and said, "What was that?" And I said, "Oh, it's just a piece I wrote." And he said, "Oh, man, that did something to me, And I thought, oh, wow, that's the most kind of high praise that you can get. And when I went out of the room and I looked back in the room next door where he'd been, he was a teacher, he was actually crying. And I just went, whoa. So anyway, just an interesting anecdote. So anyway, I felt like I would write some pieces that used these sounds that I loved and try and not labour over them too much. That was the genesis of these pieces. And because they were sounds I loved, I just thought and I did hum and ha over the title to use love letters, but I felt like that's what they were. They were kind of my love letters to the world, as corny as that might sound, because these are sounds I love. I love the piano, I love music, I love life. So, and I thought, bugger it, I'm going to give them that name and put them out there. And so I sat on them for a while, and then during COVID, I was quite self-conscious about putting it up on Facebook, but I decided I would. And that very first one, the one that I played the first chord of, that the guy got teary about, I just got almost immediately, within the first minute or something of putting it on Facebook, I just got all of these comments. People just loved it. And it was just so incredibly gratifying. And I was actually just bowled over by how much praise and appreciation I was getting for it. So that was kind of my COVID year where I wrote these pieces. And of course they all came, as I said a little bit earlier, in varying ways, but they all started pretty much with a sound that I loved, a lot of which were based on that chord that I described, obviously in different keys and in different voicings. And I tried my best to not labour over them too much and go with that other idea that I mentioned, which is to sort of try and let them happen, and rather than work on them for months and months, which is what I've done in the past with my pieces that I write for Jazz Quartet, which is ultimately the main forum where I've done my composing. And I stand by that. It's interesting, and I will get to the specifics of this piece, but I feel like it's all related stuff. You know, I can remember anecdotes by somebody like Elton John saying that if he can't write a song in 45 minutes, then he just doesn't bother with it. I can also remember Paul Grabowski, who's been a big influence of mine, saying something like, you know, he'll just write a piece and he didn't see the point in going back and changing it or editing it. He'd just write another one. I've always been of the mind, being the character that I am, that if I've got a good idea to begin a piece, then I'll see it through, even if it takes me 6 months to do it. And by and large, I've been very happy with the stuff I've written, and I've always got good feedback for it. That's just the way I operate. So as you can see, with this particular little project, I tried to push myself in a different direction and allow it to be a little bit more, not spontaneous isn't the exact right word, but less curated, if you like, perhaps. So anyway, that's the history of the love letters, of which I've written 9 so far, and as I've said to you in the last couple of interviews, been working hard on getting them under my fingers for a recording. So I'll talk specifically about this one, number 6. It actually began with one of those chords, this one that comes in the second section, this one. And just for those who want to know the exact notes, it's A, E, F, G, C, A. And the way I hear that is a second inversion D minor chord. Like that. It's a beautiful voicing. This style of voicing is sort of based on jazz. My experience anyway is that it's based on jazz. And one of the lovely voicings you can use in the left hand with which to build other structures above is this chord here, which is just A, E, F. And that could also be looked at. Of course, I described this chord when we first started talking today as a major 7th first inversion with the 9th added, but there are various versions. That could also be an F major 7th in first inversion, of course. But it sounds particularly beautiful on a D minor, used as a D minor chord. And then I've just got this G, C, A structure. And just to give you an example of the kinds of things you can do with these sorts of voicings is that if I keep that basic bottom section, I can put like the G on the top. So I can keep a lot of it, but move things around, because when you're when you're playing the piano, when you're comping or playing, harmonising a melody, when you're doing, say, a trio, most of these voicings would be, even though I'm using this in a solo context, would be more suited to an ensemble situation where the bass player's playing that, and I'll go like, what am I getting at? The top note of the voicing is crucial. I mean, the sound of the voicing and the way it's constructed and everything is very important, but the top note is really important, particularly obviously if we're going to play that as a chord in a jazz standard where I've got a D minor chord and I've got an A in the melody. I can't think of an example at the moment, but so it's really important. If it wasn't a melody, I might be a little looser with it and put the G on the top, the 4th. But anyway, so that sound I loved, and I ended up one day just jamming and just moving this around like this. Things like that. I got really carried away, and obviously I didn't play that very well then, but I was, in the zone, moving that chord around and getting all these sounds, and I thought, wow, that's a sound I love. I want to incorporate that in something.
Did you notate your music on manuscript, or are you doing it from memory?
What I do is I I could grab you a sheet if you like, but I normally have just sheets of manuscript floating around the piano, on the piano or nearby the piano, and a pencil and a rubber, of course. And when I'm working on something like this, I will definitely write down the bare essentials on a piece of manuscript. And then, as I may have mentioned in our other talks, over the last few years, I've become reasonably good with MuseScore. And once the thing's complete, I then notate it up in MuseScore, and I have them all notated that way.
Nice.
Okay, so I'll continue on through the process because I've actually been kind of looking forward to going back over the steps as far as I can remember, just to recount the process. But somehow out of all of that, I felt like, even though it was a D minor chord, that it was part of A minor. So it was a 4 chord because it was all white notes. Okay, all of those voicings they're using were all white notes. And as you would know as a musician, we could look at that as being D Dorian, but somehow it sounded more like A minor or C major, if you like, all white notes. And my recollection of it is that I had an intro for a piece, which is how one of my other love letters began, and it was started with this chord, which was the first chord I played of that piece, which is an A minor 9th chord. And again, it's got one of those it's a very similar voicing. Well, it's got a semitone in it, so it's just A in the bass, and then B, C, G. Just love those kinds of sounds. They sound beautiful on guitar too, those kinds of sounds. Anyway, there's a pianist called Fred Hirsch who is a favourite of mine, and I think I heard an intro of his and I was messing around with this. That kind of a sound. It was a sound that he got, and I thought, oh, geez, I love that. So as has been the case with most of these love letters, I've come up with a sound, and I know that I've got that D minor sound, but just for a minute I'll backtrack and say, I love this sound. So I create a kind of little sound world for a minute, which is what I just did then, of course. And because I think that's just heavenly for me. You know, don't mean to sound egotistical, but it's just a beautiful sound. I want to do something with that. But what's transpired is that I've had these sounds, but then I've gone, well, that's just a texture and a sound. It doesn't really have a melody, so I actually need a song. So the way these pieces have evolved is that I've had this, lovely sound or texture to begin with, and then I've created a melody that's grown out of that and turned it into a proper song. And it doesn't mean that you couldn't create a piece with just textures. And in fact, love letter number 8 is a textural piece. All of these pieces are up on my YouTube channel if people want to check them out. So I'll continue on with this now. So I played that intro in A minor, and then somehow out of that, this melody came, which is the beginning of the melody. And it's just a triad. So you could sequence that if you like, go, et cetera, But I just chose the melody, and this is getting back to that original purpose that I mentioned from the beginning. This is definitely one of the songs I remember most that kind of came to me quite quickly. Chords almost just came under my fingers without me thinking. So I had that idea. Now, it's obviously in 3/4, and I think probably, even though the introduction isn't, and that D minor thing that I was ultimately the genesis of this piece, because the A minor bit came after I thought, oh, sounds like it's an A minor. Oh, I've got this sound. I don't think any of that was in 3/4, but as soon as I started playing that, it felt like a 3/4 melody, and I love 3/4. So, and that's just the way it kind of came to me. So it went down a tone. So that's the 9th of the A minor. And that's the 9th of the G add 9 chord below it. So I'm simply just going A minor to G, which is extremely common. It's part of the Aeolian scale, of course, isn't it? Part of C major, if you like. And then I just searched around as the melody came to me to find the chords that went with it, and the next chord was the D minor. Now, I think I heard the melody there, and I'm not going to get too detailed about it all because I don't want to sort of bore people, but I think I just heard that melody, and then I thought this from the D minor. That's by the way, is a kind of a pentatonic melody which uses a fourth from the D to the G to the E. Part of my history is playing modal jazz music. I started in around about 1980, and people like McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane and so on were big figures in my life. And a lot of the music, like people like Michael Brecker and people that were sort of really big at that time, were using a kind of a pentatonic language that grew out of, well, it's part of the what you might call the post-bop language, which was sort of mid to late 60s onwards, that grew out of bebop, where the Coltrane vocabulary of fourths and pentatonics and adopted very comprehensively by McCoy Tyner, his pianist, was sort of in the air. There was a lot of that kind of pentatonic music around, so that's sort of in my roots. Anyway, I came up with the next chord, like that melody suggested itself, and then the next chord I came up with was just the E minor there. So I've gone for the 5 minor there. Mm-hmm. So I'll try and move through this a little bit more swiftly because I know we don't have a lot of time today, but I'll just play that opening phrase. D minor 9, whoops, E7 suspended. And then this next part I remember just came to me pretty much straight away. And it goes from the E minor to a G over B, which obviously would traditionally lead to a C chord, and it did. So I went. So a lot of the melody, and I happen to think this is one of the better melodies I've written, is actually a lot of chord tones. So I went G over B to C. Whoops. And even as I do this now, I can see there's a sequence there, isn't there? So G over B to C, and then a G, A minor. So it's like a little sequence, but I didn't think of it that way. It just popped out. And then, so that was my first phrase, and then somebody just put my hands on the keys and this bit came up. Now that part there, C over E to F, I am obviously adding ninths to some of these chords, but I'm not going to get too detailed. I love, again, it's another first inversion major chord. I just love the sound of those. They've got a sort of a classical sound to them. And I just heard this melody. And the chord that I really loved that I came up with then, because I was looking at the palette of chords that I'd used, and I had used a D minor here. In this next part, it begins with the C over E, I hadn't got to the D minor, and I went, I thought I'll try the D minor 9 there. Oh, yes. D minor 11th there. I really like that sound. Mm-hmm. And it's not remarkable, but just the placement of it. And I think when I think about the cyclic progressions that are going on underneath, a lot of it's based on cyclic progression. So a C, a C to an F is around the cycle of fourths, of course. What is it? And it just went to a G. But going from a G to a D, it is cycle of fifths going the other way. Sometimes it's nice to go around the other way. Mm-hmm. I think Jacob Collier talks about it. I think that might be negative harmony, don't know. But it's going around the cycle of fifths rather than the fourths, depending on which way you look at it. So anyway, we got that. And then just the sort of tonal gravity of the piece made me feel like I needed to hit an A minor chord next, because it was in A minor. I'd been dilly-dallying around the A minor, so then it was... And then this next progression just came out in kind of one bit. And then I thought, I'll go to the relative major. That's nice, finishing on the relative major. So that progression, A minor 9th, E7, E minor 7 suspended, F add 9, C add 9. There's my whole first phrase. I'll play the whole thing now. thought I was really happy with that. Still am. I think it's good.
Mm-hmm.
This is another. Please interject. I don't want to just run the show.
So you're using all the jazz chords by the sounds of it, and you're using inversions as well.
A lot of inversions. The thing about jazz chords is I use the term too, but of course what we're talking about when we talk about jazz chords is chords with extensions. And adding, obviously if you go up the chord, you get the 1, the 3, the 5, then you get the 7, then you get the 9, then you get the 11, then you get the 13. And then you've run out of notes. That's the full 7 notes of any diatonic sort of traditional scale. We tend to use the word jazz chord to describe chords that have the extensions in them, which are those extra notes above the 7th that colour the chord in a lovely way. But mainly because jazz musicians obviously like the sound of them and adopted them. But when you look back, as I'm sure you know, I mean, there's quite a lot of them in Bach, actually, maybe not voiced away. But that classic thing with the B and the C next to another on A minor, Bach was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, as most people would agree, you go back to Bach and there's so much of what we do there, even if it's in a different context. But of course, composers like Ravel and Debussy, as is often cited, used them a lot more. As is the case with jazz on the theory side, a lot of the theory concepts they're using were actually happening some 30, 40 years before in the classical arena. So, but what I particularly like, what I'm using here, I mean, I could play these kinds of jazz chords. And I used a lot of extensions and alterations and things. They're all part of that jazz language. But the ones I'm using so far are all diatonic within that key. And yes, they do have those nice notes. And I would say, yes, they are kind of jazz chords. But I like them. I sort of think of them as having a bit more of a folky kind of quality to them. And I love folk music. And the solo CD that I've been working on for many, many years is going to be called Jazz and Folk Songs, because I'm kind of inhabiting that sound world, and I'm playing things like Scarborough Fair and Danny Boy and so on. That's hopefully not too far down the track, that particular CD. Yes, you could say I'm using jazz chords, but I kind of like to think of them as being a little bit of a folky jazz sound, if you like. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's nice and simple what you've kept it. And you're using a lot of modes, are you?
Well, as I said at the beginning, when I came up with this D minor sound and I was moving it around, that's all white notes, and that's a very lay way of describing it. But that would be then a Dorian mode if I followed that. If I kept going and I just completely transposed that. So that's all voicings. They weren't perfect, but you get the idea. That we're all just moving around in the Dorian mode. Now, one of the cornerstones of kind of contemporary jazz piano is what we call the So What voicings, which is, the Miles Davis song So What? Mm-hmm. And that was obviously 59. Bill Evans was the pianist, but those fourth sounds like that, which is 2 perfect fourths like that, with a third on the top, that's a very, very important sound in jazz, particularly jazz piano. And one thing that you can do, which is an obvious thing to do, is move those chords around within the Dorian scale and just transpose them like this. Whoops. You can move those around in all kinds of ways to create colours, but they all have a particular sonority to them, don't they? So that's a very modal way of playing. So when you say, are you using modes, the answer is yes, but I wasn't sort of thinking, this is a Dorian, this is a Phrygian, this is a Aeolian, blah, 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 really. But this is definitely, I would say, ultimately a modal piece.
Is this the first time you've performed this live, or have you performed this at a gig before?
What I do, I'm very, I'm being quite fortunate in that I have still done quite a lot of gigs. So yes, I as part of my preparation for the recording, even though I had to have a couple of goes at that to get it right, I play these on gigs when the gig is appropriate. And I did one the other night, restaurant in Glebe, lovely venue, nice grand piano, people just eating. Unless you went, they're not probably going to think, they're probably not going to pay a lot of attention to you. I don't mean that in a negative way, but, as long as you're playing reasonably accessible music, they're not going to be listening in detail to what you're playing. But that's not a reason for playing my pieces. I think my pieces work very well in that context. What I'm saying is they're not, I don't have to play Elton John songs all night, although I usually play your song because I like it. So, yes, when the gig's permitting, I will put these songs in. I'm very lucky that I do gigs where I can.
Yeah, good on you. It's the best to play your originals, I think.
Well, I like it, and I think, I think these are good pieces, and they add a little bit of a quasi-classical context to what I'm doing when I'm doing solo gigs. And when I do solo gigs, I'm doing mainly jazz standards and improvising on them, but I will mix some of these pieces in along the way, and I think I'm hoping from an audience point of view that that's something they appreciate. If I do some jazz standards and I might do the Elton John song and I do, what's the other one I do? I feel like, it's Killing Me Softly. I really like that song. A few pop songs, and then I put my originals in there. I think it's a nice mix for people to listen to. Anyway, if you're okay with it, I'll just quickly go through the rest of the composition. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Yep. So we got to this part where I went. So I finished on C major, and then as is probably already apparent, I had a sort of little chord progression thing from another time that was something I really liked, and I just like, this is that same first chord actually. It's a C, exactly a C sus2 like that, but over E. Love those sounds. And just moving from that to an F sus2, so it's just moving from the three, the third degree of the scale to the fourth. So this is that kind of modal sound that I really like. Somebody that I played with once had a song that had those chords in it, and I love those. So I got to this juncture at the end of that first phrase and I felt like, where do I want to take this next? It feels like it needs a bridge or something contrasting, and I just went, what about those chords? I thought that just feels really natural to go there. So that's where I went, and then I came up with the melody, which was dee-da-da. So, and then I kept that little theme there. So that, and then I just naturally went, so I've gone like this, dee-da-boo. And then I went, what if I went with a D minor 13 chord? And so I've got the same melody, but reharmonised it, which means you can milk extra value out of it, can't you? And then I did the same thing there. Let me just get my bearings. But obviously, created a little bit of a variation by going up higher there. So that was D minor 13, lovely sound. G sus2 over B, which is like a first inversion 5 chord, to 1 again. So I'd done those two phrases, which are diatonic, and I thought, I really want something I want to go out of the key a little bit. So I figured one simplistic way is to think, I want to play a chord that's going to have an F sharp in it, maybe a C sharp, take me into a G major, D major area, just for a little bit of a contrasting sound. And I came up with a... So you can see thematically, it's very clearly related to what's just preceded it, but of course I've introduced the F sharp here. And in fact, there's a C sharp in there as well. That's a B minor 11th chord, big widespread voicing. D over F sharp, G major 13. So I was at that point where I've done that, and I'm thinking, okay. And in my mind, when I'm writing pieces, I always have the original key in mind in terms of how I'm going to get back there.
So what key are you playing in the whole time?
Well, this whole thing is in A minor or C major.
Okay.
Until here. I've suddenly gone to B minor. Really?
Yeah.
I'd say that's B minor more than D major, because I don't hit a D major. I do hit a D over F sharp, as I said here. That G major chord that I'm playing there is so often a flat 6 chord that would then go to a F sharp and then to a B minor, right? So I see that as being in B minor, that part. So I've gone up a tone.
Interesting.
Now, then I just thought, as I said, I had in my mind, I know I need to get back to A minor. I didn't necessarily want to go on a long modulatory journey there where I went through lots of key changes. I thought I'll try the E minor, because E minor is the 4 chord of B minor, and it's very close to the A minor. And I'd already used it in the A minor as the 5 minor chord. So I tried E minor. And I thought, that works. Obviously, the theme that I'm doing at the top, the dee-da-da, that's just constant through all of this whole phase. But the harmony was the thing that I had to work out. And when I came up with that, which is E minor 11th, then an A minor 11th, and then a F major 7 sharp 11th, I thought that just sounds good. And then I'll do one of these. And then I don't know how I come up with this next bit. I'll just play it, and that's basically a 2-5. So I've come out of E minor, but because I'm using an F major 7th chord there, it's the E Phrygian sound. So there you go. There's a modal way of looking at it. It's still E Phrygian. It's the same as A Aeolian and C major, isn't it? So I've gone to that B minor sound for those 4 bars or whatever it is, and I've basically moved back to the original sound, but via a different route, if you like. So I'm back to E minor now here. D, do, D. And then I went, just as I said, I can't remember how I come up with these chords. That's basically a G over B, and then a E7 flat 9 that would then move to A minor. It's taken me back, which is what I was looking for. But instead of just going straight, when you go back, there's, well, okay, I can get back to A minor, but what am I going to do? How am I going to finish the piece? So let me just get back to where I was. I got these chords. So I thought I'm going to hit an A minor. And then what I did then, I just felt like, and I think this is like the unfolding narrative of the piece, and the way that that you structure the whole form of the thing is a fairly instinctive thing. You're just like, almost like colours. It's like a drama unfolding, if you like. And I'm thinking, I kind of want something. It was like when I came up with this idea. That was because I felt like I needed something contrasting, which is obviously why we create bridges and B sections and things. I suppose ultimately I was thinking, I don't want to just go back and play the melody. It doesn't feel like it's finished yet. I will get back there. So I need a C section. So ultimately this is the C section I'm creating. So I hit the A minor. Now here I'm using a really standard chord progression. And I thought about it in preparation for this, and I thought you see it everywhere in jazz standards, but one obvious place that it is in Moon River, where it goes. You know Moon River, which I'm sure you do, because of course it's a great song that we all love. So that progression is pretty much based on that. It's very common. A minor over G, D 7th or D 9th over F sharp. There's that F major 7th. So I've gone down to semi now. Now this is all back into the original key now. E minor 11th, D minor 9th, A minor 9th, G over B, and then instead of going to C, which would be within the key, I put a little curveball in here and went, and I introduced a C sharp into the mix, okay? So that's like an A over C sharp, which of course wants to lead here to a D minor. So D minor, of course, is the 4 chord of the original key, so I'm still staying within the same key area, even though I've introduced that C sharp. And as I'm here, I'm thinking I've got all these different colours. I've got a few little moves to other sounds. Except for that B minor part, it stayed within the home key. But I'm going to try and explore in this last part of the C section, as I'm sort of following through and creating the shape of the thing, try going to a 4 minor chord in the key of C, which is the F minor. So I got to that D. Thought that's a nice sound. And one really obvious place for that F minor chord is to go back down to a C over E. And then I just kept on going around the cycle. So let me just retrace my steps. A minor, so I'm just going around the cycle now. Cycle of fourths. Cycle, D minor, G, and then I thought I could go to C, but it really needs to go to A minor. So I did a really common thing. I got to that G, put the G sharp in the bass, and came back to the A minor. And there's that motif from the beginning, where my first section finishes like this. C, B, A, 3, 2, 1. So I was really happy to suddenly go, that motif, that ties it all together. Yeah? So I'll just play you that last bit from the D minor. And then a 5 chord, E minor, and back to the A. Repeat up the octave. With slightly different voicings. And there you go.
It's interesting.
So that was my process.
Wow.
So ask away if you have questions. Maybe that's enough.
No, it's a lot of music theory you've put into that as well.
Right. Yeah.
It's really good how you've explained it.
Oh, good.
Wow.
Thank you. Go on, Stephen.
How many songs are on this album? Have you recorded it yet?
The album that will be called Love Letters, as far as I know. I've written 9, as I said before. Part of me likes the idea of a round number and writing one more, and I do have the beginnings of something, so I may, depending on how it all unfolds, I may create a number 10, but I think I'll probably make it pretty short and sweet because I feel pretty exhausted by this process. So I've got about 4 of them already recorded. So my last few, I think we probably talked about maybe 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, and I was getting the pieces under my fingers then, and they're a lot better now. They're a lot more, a lot closer to going into the studio. As I think I said to you last time, when I went into the studio the first time, I was surprised by, I got a little nervous and ended up making quite a few mistakes. And, it took me a while to get takes I was happy with. So I've been working very, very hard to avoid that happening again, so that when I go in, I feel like I can really get some takes down quite quickly without having to mess around. So I just think, well, I'd just rather do the work at home and have an easy experience in the studio. So, yes, as I said, I've got about 4 recorded already, and I've been working on these 5. There's another song that is outside of the Love Letters that I posted on Facebook during the COVID, sort of intense COVID period, that I'll probably add in, called Tim's Pop Song, which is a slightly different piece, but it feels like it fits well. So there'll be, 10 or 11 tracks on it. And I'm very excited to do that. It's been a long time since I put out some of my own music, too long, but it's when you have a particular concept in mind, you just have to stay true to that concept. And I can't, I've lost track of the amount of people who said, how's your solo CD going? And this is the CD prior to the Love Letters one that I mentioned before. I've been working on it for something like 12 or 13 years, which sounds pretty ridiculous, but that's just the way it's been. And I've had to just sort of kind of stay true to my own artistic standards and so on, and that's just the way the length it's taken. But it's been an enormously educational and gratifying experience to work through the things I've had to work through.
I thought it was pretty good today. Today's performance as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, look, I did get a little bit nervous at the beginning and made a couple of that first one, the first take we did. I could have probably lived with that, but there was one glitch that had happened, and then I screwed up a chord at the end, and I thought, nah. And then for honesty's sake, there was one more that I didn't get very far, and then that last one I think wasn't bad. Yeah, it's a funny thing. Yeah, it's a funny thing for me because I did study a lot of classical music, and I even did classical piano at college level when I was doing my original Bachelor of Music in the early 80s, and I remember getting a credit for playing a Bach prelude or something, and the general vibe was, they thought I had potential as a classical pianist. So I have played a lot of classical music, and I used to play Bach religiously every day for about 20 years. And then I did have some gigs where they wanted classical music and I played Bach pieces, but somewhere along the way, I just ended up getting a little nervous when I played written music in public. Because I suppose it's just more because my jazz practice of improvising and being loose with stuff is just the prevalent way I operate musically, so that the older I get, the more set in my ways I get, in the sense that that's the way I'm used to performing. And even though I continually push my envelope and try and develop my skills, the day doesn't go by when I don't do that.
As a classical pianist,
where I operate. Yep.
Did you get a chance to play any Beethoven or Liszt or Brahms? The real masters.
My original diet. When I went back, I think I gave you the chronology of my life in the last interview. But when I went back to piano lessons after having a bit of a break in my teens, I just did general music. Mm-hmm. The teacher gave me jazz pieces because she knew I wanted to do that. But then I went to some other teachers, and my basic diet at that time was Bach and Debussy. I did a Bartok Mikrokosmos. I don't remember much else. I just love Bach so much, and I love Debussy. And then I just played pretty much Bach for many, many years, as I've already said, out of the Well-Tempered Clavier, two-part inventions, some of the French suites. And then when I was living in the mountains, this would have been around about 2000, I'd had a wonderful student called Vashti Savelle, who now lives in Melbourne. She's a very talented pianist who came to me right out of her HSC. And she'd learnt from this Ukrainian legend in the mountains, Clara Shripchenko. I'm sorry I didn't pronounce that particularly well. She's no longer with us, unfortunately, but she had learnt from a pupil of Liszt. Anyway, she was renowned. She taught Vashti. I knew about it. She was supposed to be a bit of an old battle axe, very strict. She didn't like it when Vashti left to pursue jazz with me. But I thought I remember thinking that I was playing Bach fugues a lot, but I didn't feel like I was really playing them the way they should be played, because I had, Glenn Gould and Andras Schiff and people on record, and I knew, that there was probably more going on that I needed to deal with. So I went to her for lessons, and she taught me a lot about playing Bach fugues well, and I feel like even though I haven't played one for a long time, I kind of know what to do. And by playing Bach fugues, you really understand Bach's music. I mean, it just illuminated so much about the contrapuntal nature of his music for me in all of his pieces, that it was invaluable. But getting to your original question, I did learn 2 Mozart sonatas, a Beethoven sonata, the first one in F minor, a couple of his bagatelles. I learnt a Debussy 4-handed piano piece we did together. I did a Brahms piece. I did a Scarlatti piece. One person I haven't played is Chopin, which is probably a bit weird to some pianists. His music doesn't grab me straight away, even though there's stuff of it I do like, and I know it's incredibly important to the history of the piano and the way it's played and the way it's music is written for it. But there you have it. Life is kind of short, and I haven't got around to any Chopin. I might. I've recently been revisiting a Bach French suite, which I'm really enjoying. But I've had so much solo piano music of my own in the last, well, as I said, almost 13 years, really, to deal with that. It's kind of pushed. That's where the Bach kind of just went out the window after a while. I just have to focus on this stuff, and I'm not going to be a concert pianist or anything. So it took a back seat. But anyway, yeah, that's sort of pretty much the history of my classical piano playing there.
No, it was awesome. Amazing performance today, Tim. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, pleasure, mate. Absolute pleasure.
Next episode, you got some other pieces you'll prepare or some covers you want to try out?
Oh, look, we haven't discussed it. Let's have a discussion about that, shall we?
No, it was good. It was good to listen to some live music today.
Thank you.
Over Zoom. Yeah, it was great.
Yes, just before I go, I'll give you a little plug. I did an interview. I don't know whether you saw it, because whether you're going to Facebook, but I did an interview with Robert Levin, who is just an absolute legend of the classical world as a pianist and an improvising pianist. So I don't know whether you saw that, but for your listeners, they might be interested. It's up on my YouTube channel. I got about an hour and 15 minutes with this guy in Massachusetts talking about improvisation in classical music, and he improvises on some Mozart themes at the end. So for some reason, whatever you said at the end there just reminded me the fact that I'd done an interview myself with somebody that was an incredibly gratifying experience that I'm very happy I organised.